My name is April, and I'm 28 years old. I work as a medical assistant in a small Ohio town. Growing up, I thought we were the perfect close knit family, but beneath the surface lurked painful truths. When my brother Jake got arrested for a DUI that injured someone, my parents emptied their entire savings, $65,000, for his bail and legal defense. But when I needed surgery for a life threatening condition, my father coldly said, "If one of you has to go, it's better you than him." I just nodded and replied, "Thanks for showing me where I stand." Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned to hear how I responded when my family abandoned me at my darkest hour. I grew up in Cedar Springs, a middle-class neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio. From the outside, we seemed like the typical American family. My father, Robert, is 58 and owns a small but successful construction company. My mother, Diana, 55, taught third grade at the local elementary school. Then there's my brother Jake, 4 years older than me at 32. From my earliest memories, Jake was clearly the golden child of the family. Even as children, the difference in how we were treated was obvious. When Jake got in trouble at school for fighting or disrupting class, my parents would defend him, blaming other kids or the teachers for not understanding his spirited nature. Meanwhile, I worked hard for straight A's and helped around the house, hoping to earn the same affection and attention they freely gave my brother. "Jake's just more sensitive than you, April," my mother would say whenever I questioned the double standard. "You're so independent and capable. He needs more guidance." By the time Jake reached high school, his spirited nature had evolved into more troubling behavior. There were shoplifting incidents that my parents paid to make disappear, a minor in possession charge when he was 16 that my father handled with a donation to the police department's charity fund. Each time my parents rallied around Jake, treating each incident as an unfortunate misunderstanding rather than a pattern of behavior. I remember one night when I was 17, sitting at the top of the stairs while my parents discussed Jake's latest problem. He'd been caught with marijuana at college enough that it could have been considered intent to distribute. "We can't let this affect his future," my father had said firmly. "I'll call Larry from the club. His brother's a judge in that county." "Whatever it takes," my mother agreed. "Our boy shouldn't suffer for one mistake." I waited for them to mention that they'd just refused to help me pay for a school trip to Washington, D.C. that I'd earned through academic achievement. The money had gone to Jake's legal fees instead. They never did. As for me, I learned early that self-sufficiency wasn't just expected, it was required. I got my first job at 16, working weekends at the local grocery store. By 18, I was working nearly full-time while attending community college, paying my own way because college is a privilege, not a right. At least for me. Jake had gone to Ohio State fully funded by our parents, despite his mediocre grades and tendency to change majors annually. My health issues began when I was 19. I started experiencing persistent back pain and unusual fatigue. After putting off seeing a doctor because of the cost, I finally went, when the pain became unbearable. The diagnosis was kidney disease. Not immediately life-threatening, but something that needed monitoring and management with medication. "If it ever gets serious, we'll help with the medical bills," my father had promised during a rare moment of parental concern. Family takes care of family. I wanted to ask if that same principle applied to my college tuition, or my first car, which I'd bought myself while Jake received a new Jeep for his 20th birthday. But I held my tongue, grateful for even the conditional promise of support. After finishing my associate's degree, I became a certified medical assistant. The irony wasn't lost on me, spending my days helping others with their health while carefully managing my own condition. I found an affordable one-bedroom apartment across town and settled into adult life. My boyfriend Marcus, 29 and a nurse at the hospital where I work, was the first person who seemed to value me without conditions or comparisons. Meanwhile, Jake had been spiraling for years. After bouncing between jobs, he'd recently been fired from his position at a local marketing firm for repeatedly showing up late and intoxicated. He moved back home at 32, where our parents welcomed him with open arms and zero expectations. "He's just going through a rough patch," my mother would say during our weekly phone calls. "Your brother's so talented, he just hasn't found his calling yet." I tried once to express my concerns about Jake's drinking and increasingly erratic behavior. "I think Jake might need professional help, Mom. His drinking seems out of control and those friends he's hanging out with seem sketchy." "That's just sibling rivalry talking," she dismissed immediately. "You've always been jealous of the special bond Jake and I have." I stopped bringing it up after that, watching from a distance, as my brother's life continued its downward trajectory, and my parents continued to enable his every bad decision. Little did I know that the pattern established over decades was about to reach its breaking point in ways none of us could have anticipated. The foundation of family loyalty was about to be tested, and the results would change all our lives forever. The phone jolted me awake at 2:13 in the morning. Late-night calls trigger an instant panic response for anyone, but for medical professionals like me, they usually mean something terrible has happened at work. Instead, it was my mother, her voice shaking and barely coherent. "Jake's been arrested," she managed between sobs. "Your father and I are heading to the police station now." "What happened?" I asked, instantly alert despite the hour. "He hit another car. They're saying he was drunk, but you know how police exaggerate these things." The details emerged in fragments between my mother's denials. Jake had left a bar heavily intoxicated and driven his car straight through a red light, T-boning another vehicle. The driver, a 25-year-old woman named Sophia, had been rushed to the hospital with serious injuries. Jake was unharmed, but facing charges of DUI with injury of felony in Ohio. "We need to get him out of there," my mother insisted. "He can't spend the night in jail. You know how sensitive he is." I thought about Sophia, the unknown woman now fighting for her life because of my brother's selfishness, but kept those thoughts to myself. "I'll meet you at the station," I said instead. The police station was blindingly bright after the dark drive. My parents were already there, my father pacing the lobby while my mother sat with red-rimmed eyes. They barely acknowledged my arrival, too focused on Jake's predicament. "They're saying bail won't be set until the morning hearing," my father explained, running a hand through his thinning hair. "We need to get him the best lawyer in the city." "What about the woman he hit?" I asked. My mother looked up sharply. "That will all get sorted out. Right now, our priority is Jake." Over the next few hours, I watched my parents mobilize resources with remarkable efficiency. My father made call after call, reaching out to friends with legal connections. My mother contacted family members asking for loans. By dawn, they had secured Thomas Wellington, one of the most expensive criminal defense attorneys in Columbus, who agreed to meet us at the courthouse for the bail hearing. "It's going to take everything we have," my father told my mother in a hushed voice when they thought I couldn't hear. "The second mortgage was approved. I'll empty the joint savings account on the way to the courthouse." "Whatever it takes," my mother replied, echoing the mantra of Jake's entire life. The bail hearing was set for 9 a.m. We sat in the courtroom, a study in contrasting emotions. My parents were tense, but determined, the lawyer confident and poised. And Jake, when they finally brought him in, looked surprisingly untroubled for someone facing serious criminal charges. He offered our parents a small smile that contained no remorse, no acknowledgement of the chaos he had created. The prosecutor laid out the case in stark terms. Jake's blood alcohol level had been more than twice the legal limit. The victim, Sophia Turner, had suffered a broken pelvis, shattered femur, and internal bleeding. She was currently in the ICU with an uncertain prognosis. Given the severity of the charges and Jake's previous DUI from 3 years ago, the prosecutor requested a high bail amount. "Your Honor," Wellington argued smoothly, "Mr. Greenfield has deep ties to this community. His parents are respected business owners and educators. He poses no flight risk and deserves the opportunity to assist in his own defense from outside a jail cell." The judge set bail at $50,000. On top of that, Wellington required a $15,000 retainer. I watched as my father wrote checks without hesitation, emptying an account that represented decades of careful saving. "Dad," I said quietly as we left the courthouse, "that's your retirement money." "Family comes first," he replied firmly. "We'll figure the rest out later." Outside the courthouse, I noticed a group of people huddled together, watching us with undisguised hostility. From their resemblance to each other, I realized they must be Sophia's family. A woman who looked to be her mother was being supported by 2 others. her face drawn with worry and lack of sleep. Our eyes met briefly, and the naked pain in her expression hit me like a physical blow. These were the real victims of Jake's selfishness, not just the injured woman, but everyone who loved her. As we walked to our cars, my parents fussed over Jake like he was the victim, asking if he'd been treated well in lockup, if he needed anything, assuring him everything would be okay. Not once did they mention Sophia's name or condition. Not once did they suggest that Jake take responsibility for what he'd done. "The important thing is to focus on your defense," my father was saying. "Wellington thinks we can argue that the intersection lighting was poor and that field sobriety tests are notoriously subjective." I couldn't listen anymore. I made an excuse about needing to get to work and left them there still clustered protectively around Jake. As I drove away, I realized I was feeling something beyond my usual resignation about my family dynamics. I was feeling genuinely ashamed to be associated with people who could so completely fail to acknowledge the harm their son had caused. The irony wasn't lost on me that during this entire ordeal, my own health had been deteriorating. The fatigue I'd been battling for weeks had worsened. The back pain that signaled kidney problems had returned with a vengeance. But as usual, there was no space for my concerns in the ongoing drama of Jake's life. Little did I know that my own crisis was looming, one that would force my parents to finally reveal their true priorities in ways even I hadn't imagined possible. 2 weeks after Jake's arrest, the persistent pain in my lower back became impossible to ignore. After my shift at the clinic, I asked Dr. Mercer, one of the physicians I worked with regularly, if she could take a quick look at my labs. Her expression as she reviewed the results sent a chill through me. "April, your kidney function has decreased significantly since your last workup," she said, turning the screen so I could see the numbers. "Your creatinine levels are concerning, and these other markers suggest your condition is progressing much faster than expected." She referred me to a nephrologist who could see me the following day. Dr. Patterson ran additional tests, then sat me down with the kind of serious expression medical professionals reserve for difficult conversations. "The disease has progressed to a stage where conservative management is no longer sufficient," he explained. "You need surgery fairly urgently to prevent permanent damage and potential kidney failure." Surgery. I repeated the word, hanging heavy in the sterile office air. "Yes, we need to remove the obstruction and repair the damaged tissue. Without intervention, you're looking at complete kidney failure within months, possibly weeks." He paused, allowing me to process this information. "Given your age and otherwise good health, the prognosis with surgery is excellent, but we shouldn't delay." The details he provided next were equally overwhelming. The procedure would cost approximately $70,000. My insurance, a basic plan I could afford on my medical assistant's salary, would cover only 60%. That left me responsible for $28,000, plus additional costs for follow-up care and medications. "I can give you information about payment plans," Dr. Patterson offered, clearly sensing my financial panic. "And there are some assistance programs we can explore." I left his office in a daze, calculations running through my head. My savings account held just over $8,000, the result of years of careful budgeting. Even with the most generous payment plan, I was nowhere near being able to afford the surgery I needed to save my own life. That evening, Marcus came over with takeout and found me surrounded by paperwork at my small kitchen table. "What's all this?" he asked, setting down the bags of food. I explained the situation, trying to maintain clinical detachment, as if discussing another patient's case. Marcus listened intently, his nurse's training evident in the focused questions he asked. "April," he said, finally reaching for my hand, "I have about 12,000 saved. It's yours if you need it." The offer nearly broke me. We'd only been dating for 7 months, and here he was offering his entire savings without hesitation. It was so contrary to my family experience that I hardly knew how to respond. "I can't take your money," I said, "but thank you for offering. It means more than you know." "What about your parents?" he asked carefully. "With your dad's business, they must have resources." I thought about the $50,000 in bail money, the $15,000 legal retainer, and the second mortgage my parents had taken out for Jake's defense. I thought about my father's promise years ago. If it ever gets serious, we'll help with the medical bills. Family takes care of family. I guess it's time to find out if that's true, I said. The next day was Sunday, traditionally family dinner night, though I'd been skipping more of these gatherings lately. This time I made sure to attend, arriving at my parents' suburban home with a folder containing my medical information. We ate the usual pot roast while conversation revolved entirely around Jake's case. His lawyer was pushing for a plea deal. The injured woman Sophia had finally been released from the ICU, but faced months of physical therapy and rehabilitation. If she'd been wearing her seatbelt properly, her injuries wouldn't have been so severe, my mother commented, passing the mashed potatoes. Wellington thinks we can use that in negotiations. I set down my fork, appetite gone. Can we talk about something else for a minute? Something important? My parents exchanged a look, but nodded reluctantly. I need to have kidney surgery, I said, opening my folder and placing my medical documents on the table. My condition has worsened, and without intervention, I'm looking at kidney failure. I explained the situation as clearly as I could, including the costs and what my insurance would cover. I've saved about $8,000, but I'm still short by $20,000 for the surgery alone. I was hoping you might be able to help given the circumstances. The silence that followed was deafening. My father glanced at the medical papers but didn't pick them up. My mother's expression remained unchanged. April. My father finally said, his voice carrying the same tone he used when denying my request for dance lessons as a child. You know we've committed everything we have to Jake's legal defense. There's nothing left. But this is life-threatening, I pressed. The doctor says I need surgery within weeks. My father looked me directly in the eye, his expression oddly detached. If one of you has to go, it's better you than him. The words hit me with physical force. I turned to my mother, hoping for some objection, some sign that my father's statement had crossed a line even for her. Instead, she nodded in agreement. He's always been our priority, she said, her voice eerily calm. You're on your own with this, April. You've always been so independent anyway. In that moment, 28 years of suspicion crystallized into certainty. I wasn't just less favored than my brother. In the economy of my parents' love, I was essentially worthless. I gathered my medical papers with steady hands, surprising myself with my own composure. I stood up, tucked the folder under my arm, and looked at them both. They seemed smaller, somehow, diminished by the nakedness of their disdain. Thanks for showing me where I stand, I said quietly. Then I walked out of their house for what I expected might be the last time. In my car, the composure finally broke. Tears came in a flood, and I found myself struggling to breathe between sobs. I called Marcus, barely able to form words. I'm coming over, he said immediately. Don't drive like this, just stay there until you calm down, then go straight to your place. I'll be waiting. I sat in my parents' driveway for 20 minutes, tears gradually subsiding as determination took their place. My parents had made their choice. Now I would make mine. If I was truly on my own, then I would save myself whatever it took. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I spent the day researching every possible avenue for financing my surgery. The hospital financial counselor offered a payment plan that would stretch over 60 months, but even those payments would strain my budget beyond breaking point. Various medical crowdfunding sites seemed like desperate long shots, especially with no family support to help spread the word. Marcus had repeated his offer to contribute his savings, and while I was deeply moved by his generosity, I was reluctant to start our relationship with such a significant financial imbalance. Besides, even with his contribution, we'd still be short by thousands. Desperate for any solution, I began sorting through a box of family documents I'd stored in my closet. Birth certificate, immunization records, the deed to my car, and at the bottom a folder labeled Grandma's Will. My maternal grandmother had passed away when I was 22. She'd left most of her modest estate to my mother, with small bequests to Jake and me. My portion had been $5,000, which had helped me finish my certification program. But as I reviewed the will, now a detail caught my attention that I'd forgotten about entirely. And to my granddaughter April, I leave my mineral rights to the 20 acres in Crawford County, Pennsylvania. At the time, I hadn't thought much about this bequest. The land had been in my grandmother's family for generations, but had never produced any income as far as I knew. Now, though, with desperation sharpening my focus, I began to research exactly what mineral rights meant and whether they might have any value. What I discovered over the next few days transformed my situation completely. The land sat within the Marcellus Shale region, one of the largest natural gas fields in the United States. In recent years, energy companies had been actively acquiring mineral rights throughout the area for natural gas extraction through hydraulic fracturing or fracking. I consulted with a local attorney, Judith Rivera, who specialized in mineral rights. She confirmed that my rights could indeed be valuable, potentially very valuable, given the location. You have two options, she explained during our consultation. You can lease the rights and receive ongoing royalties if gas is extracted, or you can sell the rights outright for a lump sum. Which would you recommend in my situation? I asked. Given your medical needs, selling might make more sense. It provides certainty and immediate funds. Leasing offers potentially higher returns over time, but there's no guarantee they'll drill, and royalties can take months or years to materialize. Following her advice, I discreetly listed my mineral rights as available for purchase. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, I received calls from multiple energy companies interested in acquiring the rights. The process raised ethical questions I hadn't anticipated. Research revealed environmental concerns about fracking, including potential water contamination and increased seismic activity. I spent several nights reading scientific papers and environmental reports, trying to reconcile my urgent need for funds with the potential long-term impacts of my decision. Ultimately, I decided to proceed with selling rather than leasing, reasoning that someone would eventually extract the gas, whether I sold now or later. At least this way I could use the funds for a genuine medical necessity rather than profit. I engaged in negotiations with several companies, leveraging competing offers to drive up the price. Throughout this process, I told no one except Marcus and my attorney what I was doing. Certainly not my parents or Jake. The final offer came from Keystone Energy, $125,000 for the full mineral rights to the 20 acres. After Judith's fees and taxes, I would clear approximately $105,000. More than enough for my surgery and recovery, with a substantial amount remaining. The day I signed the final paperwork and received confirmation of the wire transfer to my account, I experienced a bewildering mix of emotions: relief about my medical situation, gratitude toward my grandmother, whose gift would literally save my life, sadness that I'd had to resort to selling a family legacy, and beneath it all, a smoldering anger at my parents, whose abandonment had forced this choice. "You did what you had to do," Marcus assured me that evening as we sat on my small balcony. "And your grandmother would probably be happy knowing her legacy is helping you when you need it most." I nodded, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "I'm scheduling the surgery tomorrow, and I'm not telling them." Marcus didn't have to ask who "them" referred to. He simply took my hand and squeezed it in silent support. The next morning, I called Dr. Patterson's office and scheduled my surgery for the following week. For the first time since my diagnosis, I allowed myself to believe I might actually survive this ordeal, not just physically, but emotionally as well. The road ahead would be difficult, but at least now I could see a path forward, one I had created entirely on my own. The day of my surgery arrived with a mix of anxiety and determination. Marcus picked me up at 5:30 in the morning, my overnight bag packed with essentials. The hospital corridors were quiet at that hour, the harsh lighting giving everything a slightly surreal quality. "Are your parents meeting us here?" the intake nurse asked as she processed my paperwork. "No," I replied simply. "Just my boyfriend today." She glanced at Marcus, then back at me, clearly noting the absence of family, but professional enough not to comment further. The pre-operative preparation passed in a blur of forms, vital sign checks, and last-minute consultations. Dr. Patterson stopped by, his confident manner reassuring as he explained once more what to expect. "The procedure will take approximately 4 hours," he said. "We'll need to make an incision here." He indicated a spot on my lower back to access the kidney and remove the obstruction. "We'll also repair the damaged tissue if possible." As the orderlies came to transport me to the operating room, I grabbed Marcus's hand. "If anything happens, I started suddenly fearful. "Nothing's going to happen," he interrupted firmly. "But I'll be right here waiting when you wake up, I promise." The operating room was blindingly bright and cold. The anesthesiologist had a kind voice as she explained what she was doing. The last thing I remember was counting backward from 10, making it only to 8 before darkness claimed me. I awoke disoriented and in pain, the beeping of monitors gradually penetrating the fog of anesthesia. True to his word, Marcus was sitting beside my bed, his face lighting up when he saw my eyes open. "Hey, there you are," he said softly. "Surgery went well. Dr. Patterson said there were some complications, but they managed to repair everything." The complications, as I would later learn, involved more extensive damage than the imaging had revealed. What should have been a 4-hour surgery had stretched to nearly 7, requiring a blood transfusion, and resulting in a longer projected recovery period. The first few days post-surgery passed in a haze of pain medication, brief walks around the hospital floor supported by nurses or Marcus, and fitful sleep interrupted by vital sign checks. Marcus divided his time between work shifts and my hospital room, while two of my closest friends, Tara and Danielle, took turns bringing fresh clothes books and company. It was Tara who let slip the information that my parents knew about my surgery. "Your mom called the hospital looking for you," she said on my third post-op day. "Apparently they tried calling you at home and got worried when you didn't answer for days." "How did they even know I was here?" I asked, wincing as I shifted in the hospital bed. "The insurance company sent them some kind of notification since you were still on their family plan for major medical." Tara looked uncomfortable. "They visited Jake in jail instead of coming here. I overheard your mom tell the nurse at the station." The news should have hurt, but instead it felt like final confirmation of what I already knew. They had made their choice repeatedly and consistently. Now, I was making mine. The physical recovery was even more challenging than anticipated. Walking, which I'd taken for granted all my life, became a painful exercise in endurance. The incision site throbbed constantly for weeks. Sleep came only in short bursts between discomfort and medication schedules. But alongside the physical recovery, something else was healing too. Each day I managed on my own. Each challenge I overcame without my parents' support strengthened my resolve and sense of self-worth. Marcus saw it happening, commenting one evening as he helped change my dressing. "You're different now," he observed. "Stronger somehow." "I've had to be," I replied, but I knew it was more than that. For the first time, I was fully recognizing my own value independent of my family's assessment. As my strength gradually returned, I began making plans. The medical bills arrived as expected, substantial, but no longer terrifying. I paid them immediately, the act of writing those checks feeling strangely empowering. With the remaining funds from the mineral rights sale, I consulted a financial advisor. On her recommendation, I set aside money for future medical expenses and invested a portion for long-term security. But the decision that brought me the most satisfaction was using some of the money for a down payment on a small house on the east side of the city, in a neighborhood of mature trees and quiet streets. "You're buying a house?" Marcus asked when I told him surprise evident in his voice. "I'm tired of paying rent with nothing to show for it," I explained. "And after everything that's happened, I want a place that's truly mine, a home where I make the rules and set the boundaries." He helped me move carrying boxes up and down stairs, despite my protests that it was too soon after my surgery to be doing heavy lifting. My small collection of furniture looked almost comically inadequate in the new space. But that didn't matter. For the first time in my life, I had created a sanctuary that belonged entirely to me. Throughout my recovery and move, I received not a single call or text from my parents. It was as if acknowledging my medical crisis would somehow diminish their focus on Jake. Their silence spoke volumes about where I stood in their priorities, and though it still hurt, the pain was dulled by my growing independence. What I didn't realize was that while I was rebuilding my life, my parents' world was continuing to unravel in ways that would soon bring our paths crashing back together. 2 months after my surgery, my phone lit up with an unfamiliar sight: my mother's name on the caller ID. I stared at it for several rings, debating whether to answer before finally swiping to accept. "April." My mother's voice sounded strained, almost unrecognizable. "Yes?" I replied neutrally, neither warm nor hostile. "How are you feeling?" she asked, an awkward attempt at normalcy. "I'm recovering well, thanks." I left it at that, not volunteering details about the surgery she hadn't bothered to inquire about when it happened. "That's good." A pause. "We saw the insurance statements. I didn't realize your condition was so serious." The implicit question hung in the air. Why didn't you tell us? I let it hang there, unwilling to point out the obvious answer. "April," she continued when I didn't respond. "I'm calling because we need to talk about something important. Your father and I are in a difficult financial situation." Of course. Not a call to check on my health or express belated concern, but a call because they needed something. "Jake's case has taken a turn for the worse," she explained. "The woman he hit, her injuries turned out to be more severe than initially thought. She has permanent nerve damage and won't be able to return to her job as a physical therapist." I thought about Sophia, the young woman whose life had been irreversibly altered by my brother's selfishness, and felt a surge of empathy for her. "The prosecutor is pushing for maximum penalties," my mother continued, oblivious to my thoughts. "We've had to increase Wellington's retainer, and there might be a civil suit coming as well." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, the polite response automatic, even as I wondered where this was leading. "We were hoping you might be able to help out just until we get through this rough patch. We know you recently came into some money." So they knew about the mineral rights sale. I shouldn't have been surprised. In a small town, financial transactions of that size rarely stayed private for long. "I need that money for my medical expenses and recovery," I said carefully. "But surely you have something to spare," my mother pressed. "Family has to stick together in times of crisis." The irony of her statement was so stark that I almost laughed. Instead, I took a deep breath and replied evenly, "I understand you're in a difficult position, but I'm not in a position to help financially right now." "April, this is your brother we're talking about. He could go to prison for years." "Yes, for a crime he committed," I pointed out. "Actions have consequences, Mom." "I can't believe you're being so cold," she said, her voice hardening. "After everything we've done for you." That broke through my composure. "What exactly have you done for me? When I needed life-saving surgery, you and Dad made it abundantly clear where I stood in your priorities." "That was different," she stammered. "We were in shock about Jake's situation. And I was facing kidney failure. You told me I was on my own, so that's where I am now, Mom. On my own, just like you wanted." The conversation ended shortly after, with my mother's thinly veiled accusations of selfishness and ingratitude. I set down the phone feeling shaky but oddly liberated. For perhaps the first time in my life, I had stated my boundaries clearly and stood by them despite the emotional manipulation. 2 weeks later, Jake's trial began. Though I hadn't planned to attend, something drew me to the courthouse on the opening day. I slipped into the back row of the gallery, unnoticed by my parents, who sat directly behind the defense table. The prosecutor laid out the case methodically, presenting evidence of Jake's blood alcohol level, eyewitness accounts of his erratic driving before the crash, and detailed medical reports of Sophia's injuries. When Sophia herself took the stand to deliver her victim impact statement, the courtroom fell completely silent. She moved slowly to the witness box, her gait uneven, clearly still in pain. At 25, she should have been in her physical prime. Instead, she spoke of constant pain, of medical procedures, and physical therapy, of a career cut short and dreams deferred. "I became a physical therapist because I wanted to help people heal," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion evident on her face. "Now I'm the one who needs help just to walk across a room." The irony isn't lost on me. Throughout her testimony, I watched my brother. His expression remained impassive, almost bored. Not once did he make eye contact with the woman whose life he had devastated. My parents, too, seemed unmoved, whispering to each other occasionally, as if discussing something far more mundane than the suffering their son had caused. When the prosecution rested its case, Wellington launched into an aggressive defense, attempting to shift blame to road conditions, the timing of the traffic light, even suggesting that Sophia's injuries were exaggerated. It was a technical and heartless approach that seemed to mirror my family's inability to acknowledge responsibility. After 4 days of testimony, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. The judge, citing Jake's previous DUI and the severity of Sophia's injuries, sentenced him to 8 years in prison with possibility of parole after 5. My mother collapsed against my father, sobbing. Jake was led away in handcuffs, looking stunned, as if consequences were an entirely foreign concept. I sat quietly, feeling neither vindication nor satisfaction, just a profound sadness for all the lives damaged by my brother's actions and my parents' enabling. As I exited the courthouse, I heard my name being called. My parents were hurrying down the steps after me, my father's face flushed with emotion. "April, wait," he called. "We need to talk to you." I stopped bracing myself for accusations or anger. Instead, my father's tone was almost pleading. "We're about to lose everything," he said without preamble. "The house, the business, everything. The second mortgage, Jake's legal fees, the potential civil suit from Sophia's family. We're drowning here." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said and meant it. Despite everything, I took no pleasure in their suffering. "We know about the mineral rights you sold," my mother interjected. "Those were family lands, April. That money could have helped all of us." "Those rights were left to me by Grandma," I corrected her gently. "And I used the money for necessary medical treatment that you refused to help with." "Family needs to stick together in crisis," my father said, echoing my mother's earlier words. "Jake is facing years in prison. We need to be united now more than ever." I looked at them both, these people who had raised me but never truly seen me. Where was this family unity when I was facing a life-threatening condition? When I came to you for help, and you told me, and I quote, "If one of you has to go, it's better you than him." My father had the grace to look away, but my mother's gaze remained challenging. "You've always been independent, April. Jake needs us more." "And that's your choice to make," I acknowledged. "But my choices are my own now. I wish you the best, but I won't be providing financial assistance." I turned and walked away, their calls fading behind me. In the weeks that followed, news filtered through mutual acquaintances. My parents had indeed lost their house, unable to maintain the second mortgage payments. My father's business was struggling under the weight of legal bills and his own distraction. They had moved into a small apartment, a dramatic downsizing from the suburban home they'd owned for 30 years. The phone calls began soon after, daily at first. Voicemails alternated between guilt trips and awkward attempts at reconciliation, always with an undercurrent of financial need. "Please, just one conversation," my mother would plead. "We're still your parents, April. We need to talk things through." I let each call go to voicemail, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. The patterns of a lifetime wouldn't change overnight, and I wasn't ready to risk the progress I'd made in establishing healthy boundaries. What they didn't know, couldn't know, was that I was engaged in my own healing process, one that would eventually determine whether there was any path forward for our fractured family. 4 months after my surgery, I had regained most of my physical strength. The incision had healed into a thin pink line across my lower back, a permanent reminder of both trauma and survival. My kidney function had stabilized, and Dr. Patterson had reduced my follow-up appointments to once every 3 months. My new home had gradually taken shape around me, filled with carefully chosen furniture and decor that reflected my tastes rather than budget constraints. Marcus spent more and more time there, eventually leaving a toothbrush in the bathroom and claiming a drawer in the bedroom dresser. Meanwhile, my parents' situation continued to deteriorate. Their apartment was in a part of town they would have considered beneath them a year earlier. My father had been forced to sell his construction company at a significant loss. My mother had returned to teaching, but the income barely covered their basic expenses, let alone the ongoing legal costs associated with Jake's case. The daily phone calls had continued, though I rarely answered. When I did, the conversations followed a predictable pattern: awkward pleasantries, thinly veiled requests for financial assistance, and emotional manipulation when those requests were denied. "We're going to have to cancel our health insurance," my mother informed me during one such call. "We just can't afford the premiums anymore." "That's concerning," I replied. "Have you looked into the marketplace options?" "They're all too expensive," she sighed. "If only we had access to some of those mineral rights funds, we could get through this rough patch." I changed the subject, unwilling to be drawn into the same circular discussion. Each conversation left me emotionally drained, caught between compassion for their genuine difficulties and resentment at their persistent sense of entitlement to resources I had needed for my own survival. At Marcus's suggestion, I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Lauren Chen, who specialized in family trauma. Our weekly sessions became a safe space to unpack decades of complicated emotions. What you're describing has elements of what we call golden child syndrome, Dr. Chen explained during one session. Families sometimes designate one child as the focus of their hopes, dreams, and resources, while expecting another child to be self-sufficient regardless of circumstances. So it wasn't just in my head, I said, the validation both comforting and painful. No, it wasn't. And their response to your medical crisis was a particularly extreme manifestation of this pattern. She leaned forward slightly. The question now is, what kind of relationship do you want with your parents moving forward, if any? It was a question I wrestled with daily. Despite everything, these were the people who had raised me. Complete estrangement felt like an extreme solution, yet returning to the old patterns was unthinkable. As I worked through these questions in therapy, I was simultaneously building a chosen family around me. Marcus, of course, was central to this new foundation. But there were others, Tara and Danielle, who had supported me through surgery and recovery, colleagues from the clinic who had covered my shifts and sent flowers, neighbors who checked in with home-cooked meals and offers of help. I realized that family could be defined by actions rather than blood, by mutual support rather than obligation. This insight didn't solve the question of my parents, but it did provide a framework for evaluating relationships based on their health rather than their history. Then came the day when my father showed up at my door unannounced. He looked older than I remembered, the stress of recent months evident in the new lines on his face and the slight stoop of his shoulders. "Can we talk?" he asked simply. I hesitated, then stepped back to allow him inside. We sat in my living room, the silence stretching between us like an uncrossable gulf. "Your mother doesn't know I'm here," he finally said. "She still believes we can convince you to share your money." "And you don't?" I asked. "I don't know what I believe anymore." He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Everything I thought I was building, everything I thought I was protecting, it's all gone. The house, the business, our reputation in the community. Jake's serving his sentence, which is right, I suppose, though it kills your mother to admit it." I waited, unsure where this was leading. "I keep thinking about what you said about how we treated you when you needed us." His voice dropped almost to a whisper. "If one of you has to go, it's better you than him." Did I really say that to my own daughter? "You did," I confirmed quietly. He nodded, a small gesture of acknowledgement. "I've been trying to understand how I became the kind of father who would say such a thing, who would mean such a thing." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't know if I deserve that. But I wanted you to know that I see it now, what we did to you. Not just with the surgery, but your whole life." It wasn't a complete apology, and it didn't address the decades of favoritism and neglect, but it was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd ever had. "What do you want from me, Dad?" I asked. "Nothing," he said, and for once I believed him. "I just needed to say it out loud to you. What happens next is up to you." After he left, I called Marcus and told him about the conversation. Then I called Dr. Chen and scheduled an emergency session. The walls I had built around my heart to protect myself from my parents' indifference were being tested, and I needed guidance to navigate this unexpected development. The following weekend, I agreed to meet both my parents at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. The conversation was difficult, halting with long silences and occasional tears. My mother struggled more than my father to acknowledge the patterns of favoritism, still insisting that they had done the best they could with a sensitive son and an independent daughter. "But those were roles you assigned us," I pointed out. "Jake wasn't inherently more deserving of support, and I wasn't inherently less deserving of care." By the end of our 2-hour conversation, little had been resolved. My mother still clearly hoped for financial assistance, though she didn't ask directly. My father seemed genuinely reflective, though whether that reflection would lead to meaningful change remained to be seen. What had changed, though, was my own perspective. I no longer needed their approval or understanding to validate my worth. I no longer measured my decisions against their potential reactions. I had built a life centered on my own values and populated with people who demonstrated love through actions rather than mere biology. This realization crystallized further when Marcus proposed the following month on a weekend trip to Lake Erie. As we stood on the shore watching the sunset, he knelt on the sandy beach and offered not just a ring, but a vision of family built on mutual respect and genuine care. Yes, I said the simplest answer to the most important question. That night, as we celebrated our engagement with champagne in our hotel room, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. A medical crisis that might have ended my life had instead forced me to fight for it, not just physically, but emotionally as well. The parents who should have been my strongest advocates had abandoned me, but in doing so had inadvertently pushed me toward true independence and the creation of healthier bonds. I thought of Sophia still rebuilding her life after my brother's actions had shattered it. I thought of Jake serving time for choices made after a lifetime of enablement. I thought of my parents facing the consequences of prioritizing the wrong things for too long. And I thought of myself no longer the overlooked daughter desperate for crumbs of parental approval, but a woman who had saved her own life in more ways than one. The future stretched before me, uncertain in its details, but secure in its foundation. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms, surrounded by love that was freely given, rather than constantly withheld. In the end, the crisis that had revealed the painful truth about my family had also opened the door to an authentic life I might never have found otherwise. For that unexpected gift, I was finally genuinely grateful. If you've ever felt undervalued by the very people who should value you most, I hope my story reminds you that family is defined by love in action, not by blood or obligation. Have you ever had to set boundaries with toxic family members? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and share with someone who might need to hear that they deserve better. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the family you choose is more healing than the family you're born into.